Today, we follow what happens when Karens with ego attempt to climb Mount Everest. From a photographer who approached hazardous rock and ice zones for closer shots, to a climber who paused near exposed cliff edges for sponsored content filming. The consequences that followed were so avoidable and devastating that witnesses and rescue teams were deeply disturbed. It was March 15, 2016. On the upper slopes of Mount Everest above the South Col, dense cloud cover limited visibility, while strong winds swept across the exposed ridgelines. The extreme cold and thin air of the world's highest peak created conditions where prolonged exposure quickly became life-threatening. Amelia was a 21-year-old marketing professional from Boston who had recently completed her first marathon. She often framed physical challenges as extensions of her personal identity and brand presence, sharing training milestones online. Seeking a defining achievement, she joined a commercial Everest expedition despite experience limited to lower elevation summer hiking. Amelia believed her fitness training, premium equipment, and guided expedition structure were sufficient to offset her lack of high-altitude mountaineering experience. During pre-climb briefings, guides emphasized worsening weather along the upper mountain. Several climbers postponed summit rotations after reviewing forecasts predicting strong winds and severe wind chill. Amelia chose to continue. She displayed confidence that her preparation level and equipment quality placed her above typical risk thresholds. Safety warnings were interpreted as general caution rather than immediate operational danger. Although wearing technical outer layers, she relied partially on moisture-retaining base clothing that was less effective during prolonged sub-zero exposure. As the team climbed higher, winds intensified and blowing snow reduced visibility. Amelia began showing early fatigue, breathing heavily and slowing, despite maintaining a regulated pace. Sherpa staff observed that her inner layers were damp from perspiration, which significantly reduces insulation efficiency in extreme cold. Suggestions to adjust clothing or pacing were offered, but she continued without making substantial changes. On an exposed ridge section above partial snow shelter, Amelia stopped in open wind to adjust her pack. Remaining stationary allowed strong gusts to penetrate her moisture-compromised insulation system. In high-altitude environments, even short pauses in strong wind can accelerate core temperature decline when clothing layers are damp from exertion. To continue along the fixed rope line, blowing snow further reduced visibility, and her phone battery failed in the cold, eliminating GPS navigation reference. She drifted slightly off the marked path into a more exposed slope section. As core temperature dropped, fine motor control deteriorated, making it difficult to manage climbing hardware or secure clothing. Sherpa staff noted repeated stumbling and difficulty maintaining the balance along the fixed line. Minor falls onto hard snow and ice caused superficial injuries, while prolonged exposure and altitude hypoxia worsened cognitive function and reaction speed. Her condition progressed into advanced hypothermia, marked by confusion and poor directional judgment. She attempted to shelter behind a small snow formation, but protection was minimal. As body temperature declined further, paradoxical undressing behavior was observed before she lost consciousness during assisted descent attempts toward lower camp. Emergency communication was transmitted once satellite signal became available. However, sustained high winds and low visibility prevented immediate evacuation by air. Rescue operations at extreme altitude depend on weather windows, and conditions did not allow rapid response. Support personnel remained with her as long as environmental conditions permitted. When weather briefly stabilized, recovery teams located her body a short distance from the fixed route, partially covered by wind-blown snow. Medical review determined the cause of death to be severe hypothermia, compounded by hypoxia and exhaustion. Equipment inspection confirmed moisture-saturated base layers and reduced insulation performance. Tracking and communication records showed deviation from the primary climbing line. The incident was later recorded in expedition safety analyses as a preventable exposure fatality associated with delayed descent, inadequate thermal management, and overconfidence in physical conditioning. On the upper slopes of Mount Everest, small errors in judgment can eliminate the narrow margin between survival and irreversible exposure. It was August the 22nd, 2015 on the upper slopes of Mount Everest, where dense mist and wind-blown snow covered exposed rock paths. A small cascade near the route kept granite surfaces slick with moisture and algae growth, and warning signs reminded climbers to stay away from unstable wet rock zones. Sai John Reeves was 28, a software engineer who treated outdoor hiking as an optimization challenge, often preferring personal shortcuts in navigation. Although he had completed several moderate urban mountain hikes, he lacked technical alpine climbing experience. He joined a commercial Everest expedition, viewing the climb as a quick physical achievement rather than a long endurance challenge in extreme mountain environments. The lower Everest slope where the incident occurred was shaped by glacial erosion, forming a canyon-like terrain with meltwater streams flowing through steep rock walls. Constant mist from ice runoff kept nearby granite surfaces wet and extremely cold. The thin air, strong winds, and moisture-covered rock created conditions where prolonged stopping or slow movement significantly increased exposure risk. Reeves observed climbers using the rope-supported trail system. Guides and Sherpa staff had repeatedly warned against crossing exposed wet granite zones. However, he considered the marked route unnecessarily indirect and chose a straighter path across rock slabs closer to the canyon wall, viewing safety guidance as overly cautious. His decision reflected strong confidence in personal judgment over environmental hazard warnings. By mid-afternoon, Reeves left the designated climbing line despite warnings from nearby climbers. He stepped onto moisture-covered granite near the glacier runoff channel, where rougher rock texture initially provided limited traction. As he moved forward, his pace increased and confidence grew, but the nearly invisible ice and mineral film reduced friction to levels similar to frozen surfaces. While crossing a smoother rock platform about 40 feet above the canyon stream, his boots suddenly lost grip. The first slip was minor, allowing him to stabilize with his hands, but his body was already leaning dangerously forward. Instead of retreating carefully, he attempted to continue toward what he believed was more stable footing. The second movement caused complete loss of balance, and he began sliding down the granite slope. Acceleration increased as the incline steepened, and the polished rock offered almost no resistance. During the uncontrolled descent, he struck several rock protrusions that likely caused internal injuries and deep lacerations before the slide continued toward the canyon basin. The slide ended when he launched from a lower rock ledge into a turbulent meltwater pool fed by glacier runoff channels. Impact velocity was estimated near highway-level sprint speed. Upon entering the water, strong hydraulic currents immediately pulled him downward and forced him against submerged rock structures. The recirculating circulation pattern beneath the waterfall created a repeated downward suction motion that trapped and disoriented submerged bodies. 3 climbers witnessed the fall and reported the incident through expedition communication channels. Rescue teams were dispatched but faced severe terrain access difficulty and high-altitude weather instability. Swift water and technical climbing equipment were required, delaying physical arrival at the site. Visual search inside the hydraulic turbulence zone was not possible during the initial response period. Reeves's body was recovered several days later downstream, lodged against submerged rocks beneath the canyon waterfall drainage zone. Medical examination determined the cause of death as drowning with contributing blunt force trauma and hypothermia. A wearable camera attached to his equipment recorded the entire sequence of movement, fall progression, and route deviation. The case was later included in Expedition Safety Education Archives as a preventable exposure. Fatality associated with overconfidence in route selection and failure to maintain marked trail discipline in high-altitude waterfall canyon terrain. It was October 14th, 2016, on the upper roots of Mount Everest, where autumn weather can quickly change from clear skies to storm conditions. Above the lower camps, the terrain is exposed granite and ice with little natural shelter, and strong winds can rapidly bring freezing precipitation and reduced visibility. Medleyiana was 31, a real estate agent from Denver who had recently taken up mountaineering as a recreational achievement challenge. She had successfully climbed several lower elevation peaks during summer seasons under stable weather conditions. Ciano viewed high-altitude climbing primarily as a personal milestone rather than a long-term technical skill requiring specialized alpine experience. She publicly aimed to complete multiple major climbs before her next birthday, expressing confidence that physical fitness and determination were sufficient preparation. The route above the mid-camp zone on Everest consists of exposed rock and ice scrambling sections where precise hand and foot placement is required. October mountain conditions often involve extreme temperature drops, strong wind currents, and rapidly forming ice layers on rock surfaces. When moisture combines with freezing wind exposure, granite and ice paths can become extremely slippery. Hypothermia risk increases sharply when climbers are exposed to wet wind without protective shelter. Weather briefings issued by expedition guides warned of high-altitude wind activity later in the day. Some climbers delayed summit rotations. After reviewing the forecast, Ciano began her ascent early under relatively calm sky conditions, dismissing the warning as conservative risk messaging. She progressed efficiently toward the upper route zone, maintaining steady pace and confidence in her physical endurance. Across the climbing path, and atmospheric visibility started decreasing. Ciano continued upward, believing that turning back was unnecessary since she was already deep into the ascent zone. This decision reflected strong reliance on personal judgment rather than environmental risk indicators. Front arrived, bringing wind speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour and horizontal sleet. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet within minutes as ice particles coated exposed granite and rock surfaces. Ciano attempted to continue upward rather than retreat towards safer lower ground. During traversal of a narrow ridge segment, she misinterpreted route markers under low visibility and began climbing a steeper rock face instead of following the fixed ledge system. Approximately 20 minutes into the storm, her left foot lost traction on iced granite. She attempted to grab a handhold but encountered smooth, wet rock surfaces. Her body shifted backward, losing contact with the climbing line. She fell approximately 40 feet down a rock wall, striking several protruding stone edges before landing on a narrow ledge platform. The fall resulted in a compound fracture of her left leg, multiple rib fractures, and a serious head injury. Ciano was stranded on a ledge, roughly 8 feet wide, fully exposed to wind-driven snow and sleet. Over the following hours, progressive hypothermia developed as moisture penetrated her clothing system. Shock from traumatic injuries further impaired cognitive function as core body temperature declined. Ciano activated her personal emergency beacon during the fall. Rescue authorities received the signal, but aerial evacuation was impossible due to sustained high winds and poor visibility across the upper mountain zone. Search and rescue teams remained grounded until weather conditions improved. A recovery team reached the location the following morning. Ciano was found deceased on the ledge. Medical review determined cause of death as severe hypothermia compounded by traumatic injuries and prolonged environmental exposure. Beacon telemetry data suggested survival for several hours after the fall. The incident was later documented in expedition safety summaries as a preventable exposure fatality associated with delayed descent. Environmental risk underestimation and overconfidence in physical conditioning on the upper slopes of Mount Everest. It was September 8, 2017, on the lower expedition zones of Mount Everest, where rocky ridgelines meet glacial wind currents descending from higher camps. The area was covered by thin cloud layers, reducing long-distance visibility across the mountain face. Melted snow runoff occasionally formed small, icy channels along exposed rock surfaces. 30 Taisen was 26, a wilderness photographer who had recently joined a commercial Everest expedition seeking extreme environment subject material. He had limited high-altitude experience and treated mountain photography as a technical optimization challenge rather than a long-term endurance activity. Although he carried professional telephoto equipment, Taisen frequently attempted closer approaches to natural subjects to capture more dramatic imagery. The lower Everest climbing corridor consists of exposed granite and ice transitions where strong winds move continuously along the mountain slope. September conditions can shift rapidly as monsoon remnants interact with high-altitude air currents. At these elevations, oxygen concentration is significantly reduced, and prolonged movement pauses can lead to rapid exhaustion. Expedition safety teams had issued multiple warnings about maintaining distance from unstable ice zones and steep cliff edges. Other climbers reported Taisen preferred closer vantage positions for photography. He carried standard safety gear, but often moved independently from group formation, believing Equipment quality and physical confidence were sufficient protection. By mid-morning, Taisen observed a small group of climbers resting near a rock formation overlooking a glacial drainage channel. Instead of maintaining standard observation distance, he approached closer for photographic framing. Although his telephoto lens could have captured detailed images from afar, he preferred closer composition for visual impact. The terrain near the drainage slope was coated with thin, frozen moisture layers formed by wind-driven ice deposition. These surfaces can become extremely slippery under foot pressure. Taisen moved closer to the edge of a rock platform approximately 40 feet above a descending ice channel. While adjusting camera settings, his boot lost traction on the frost-coated granite. The first slip was minor, allowing him to brace using his hands, but his body posture had already shifted into a dangerous forward tilt toward the slope edge. Instead of retreating carefully, he attempted to reposition himself for what he believed was better photographic alignment. The continuous downward slope of the glacier-coated granite offered almost no braking friction once momentum increased. Taisen attempted to use his hands and boots to slow the slide by pressing against the icy surface, but the frost layer behaved like a solid, polished plane. High-altitude oxygen reduction likely impaired reaction speed, making controlled self-arrest movements difficult under the rapid acceleration. Wind exposure further destabilized body control during the descent. The second movement caused complete loss of balance. Taisen began sliding down the ice-polished rock surface. Acceleration increased as slope angle steepened, and friction resistance decreased. During the uncontrolled descent, he struck several protruding rock edges that likely caused deep internal injuries and skeletal trauma. The slide ended when he fell from a lower rock ledge onto a sloped ice field below. Impact force was estimated to be high due to combined gravitational acceleration and slope transition velocity. The fall caused severe chest trauma and multiple fractures, leaving him unable to move. Nearby climbers witnessed the fall and transmitted emergency distress signals once communication devices functioned under signal stability. However, strong mountain winds and low cloud cover prevented helicopter evacuation. Rescue teams were delayed until weather conditions improved. Taisen was found several hours later by expedition medical staff, unconscious on the ice slope. Medical evaluation determined cause of death as severe traumatic injury combined with high-altitude hypoxia and exposure-related physiological collapse. His camera equipment was recovered, including images documenting his progressive movement closer to the hazardous slope zone. Expedition records later used the case as a safety example of route discipline failure and risk misjudgment above the mid-expedition camps of Mount Everest. The incident was included in mountain safety documentation, emphasizing that in extreme altitude environments, technical skill, environmental awareness, and restraint are equally critical survival factors. If you haven't subscribed yet, consider joining us as we continue exploring real mountain tragedies and the dangerous psychology of ego-driven climbing decisions. It was June 3rd, 2018, on the upper roots of Mount Everest, where morning sunlight began warming frost-covered granite slopes. The previous night's freeze-thaw cycle had loosened unstable rock fragments, making debris fall more likely along exposed climbing paths above the high camp zones. Alika was 29, a fitness influencer from Los Angeles, who had built her following by documenting her transition from yoga instruction to adventure lifestyle branding. She had completed several moderate hikes, but had no technical high-altitude climbing experience. Kowalski planned to summit Everest partly as content for a sponsorship agreement with an outdoor equipment company. She frequently paused during ascent to film personal updates, treating the mountain environment primarily as a visual background rather than a high-risk survival zone. The upper Everest route above the camp system consists of exposed granite, ice fragments, and steep slope sections continuously affected by wind erosion and temperature fluctuation. June daytime heating can destabilize frost-fractured rock layers that were previously held together by freezing nighttime conditions. Even small structural failures high above can release debris that accelerates downhill under gravity. Expedition safety briefings had warned climbers about rock instability during warming cycles. Several climbers moved quickly through exposed zones to minimize time spent under steep rock faces. Kowalski, however, made frequent stops to record sponsored product footage, including extended filming sessions in areas where rapid movement was recommended. By late morning, she reached a switchback zone below the western summit wall, where the route passes directly beneath unstable cliff formations. Other climbers traversed this section at steady pace, but Kowalski stopped for nearly 20 minutes to film content featuring a branded hydration product with the summit ridge visible behind her. As sunlight struck the upper mountain wall, frostbound granite began warming and losing structural cohesion. Approximately 200 feet above her position, a rock section began to fail. The initial collapse involved a granite slab roughly 3 feet by 2 feet and estimated to weigh several hundred pounds. The primary fragment struck a lower ledge system and shattered into multiple pieces while triggering secondary rock displacement. Dozens of smaller stones were released, forming a cascading rockfall, moving directly down the slope. The first cracking sounds were heard moments before visual debris became visible. Kowalski attempted to move uphill, but was already positioned directly within the debris fall line. The first impact involved a stone approximately the size of a grapefruit, striking her shoulder, rotating her body, and causing loss of balance on loose trail gravel. As she fell, a larger rock fragment struck her back, likely fracturing multiple ribs and damaging her spinal structure. The fatal injury occurred when a granite fragment estimated near 80 pounds struck her head and upper chest region. The impact caused catastrophic blunt force trauma and immediate loss of consciousness. The rockfall sequence lasted approximately 8 seconds from initial structural failure to final impact. 2 climbers approximately 100 yards below witnessed the event and reported it immediately. Rescue coordination was delayed due to high winds and continuing rockfall instability. Medical and recovery teams reached the site several hours later after slope safety assessment. Kowalski was found deceased at the scene. Medical examination determined a cause of death as catastrophic blunt force trauma. Audio data from her recording equipment captured the sound of the rockfall sequence and final movement moments. Expedition safety reports later used the case to emphasize hazard awareness regarding prolonged exposure in rockfall zones on the upper slopes of Mount Everest. The incident was included in mountain safety education archives as an example of environmental risk underestimation, route discipline failure, and overconfidence in personal conditioning in high-altitude terrain. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here